Yeah, so thanks for meeting with us today. I was reading a bit about your research. Watched your talk from a few years ago at the BC Children's.
Okay.
So I know you've done a lot of research in multiple areas with the microbiome and how it impacts our health. For our listeners today, just wanted to focus in on the cognitive aspect, especially with Parkinson's, as you mentioned.
Right.
Been doing a lot of research there.
Right.
So first of all, I know that the gut microbiome can kind of impact our health in a lot of ways, and the average person, including me, this is kind of thing we don't really think about in terms of health. Like we think about exercise and all these other things, but it's one thing that I think can be really overlooked.
Right.
And I wanted to ask you if you can kind of just give us a broad overview of how the microbiome can impact our health.
Yeah. I mean, when someone asks you what should you do to stay healthy, you say, well, you should exercise, you should eat a healthy diet, you should sleep well, you should avoid stress, and you should have a community of friends. Well, those are the 5 big ways of healthy aging. What we now know is that each of those is influenced by the microbes in us. So obviously diet, things like Mediterranean diet, less red meat and white sugars and things, that really influences the microbes, which then influence you. Exercise, it basically push all these things, the good things, basically dampen the inflammatory microbes and boost the ones that make these anti-inflammatory molecules, decrease inflammation and stuff. So ironically, exercise really embellishes the good microbes in you and decreases the bad ones. So it's good for you in that sense. Stress is really bad for your microbes. They go really inflammatory type thing. Sleep, we know microbes influence sleep quite significantly. And having a bunch of friends and community and family and stuff, ironically, that's microbes. So all these things still hold true, except they're all being filtered by the microbes. So it's just an added layer to it. I mean, everyone knows diet and exercise, but I now argue that is through the microbes. So the microbiome is basically all the living microbes in and on us. So estimates say that there's about as many bacteria living in and on you as there are human cells. And there's about 10 times more microbial genetic material on you than there's Homo sapiens material in you. So you're more microbes than you are human in a sense, kind of thing. And there's microbiomes all over our body. They're on our skin, urogenital tract, for example. But the gastrointestinal tract is most lived, especially down in the lower colon, down at the very end of the bottom of the intestinal tract. And it's there that many, many microbes live. They make up about a pound of stuff. So it's like this organ, we now call it a newly discovered organ kind of thing. And just to give you the number kind of thing, that if you took a gram of feces, which is about the size of your little finger, there's more microbes in there than there are humans on this entire planet. Wow. So the numbers are just astounding. You can't see them, but they're there.
Yeah.
Now this does not include the viruses and the protozoan and things like that, other microbes too, and the fungi type thing. So we've known they're there since Anthony van Leeuwenhoek invented the microscope in the late 1600s, right? He swabbed out his mouth, he saw these animalcules. He said there's living cells in us. And people said, what? You're crazy, right? And that was the first time we actually saw microbes and realized that they were actually in us. And so we've known they're there forever. But really what brought them online is the advent of DNA sequencing, because you can't grow most of these things. And so when they're doing the human genome, the sequencer sort of ran out and finished that, so what to do now? And someone said, well, let's do the microbes, because there's lots of them, it'll keep us in business kind of thing. And so the Human Microbiome Project was started. And what we now know is that each of us has a unique set of microbes. There's no one microbe that's conserved in everyone across the world. Your microbes their composition is closest to the people you live with. So if you have a twin brother or sister living on the other side of the earth versus your roommate or spouse or whatever, you're much more similar to the one. So they're environmentally acquired. You're basically born sterili, and that the first big gulp, I call it, the vaginal fecal microbes, when you take your first breath, that is when you get inoculated with these microbes. And they play a key role in the infant developing. They develop the immune system, the gut-brain, the gut axis kind of thing, the gut permeability. And we also know that they really influence brain development. We'll get there kind of thing. And then if if anyone has ever babysat or had a young kid that switches from milk to solid food, you know the end result of that. At the other end, you can change the diaper, it's stinky, whatever. They've gone from nice sweet-selling lactic acid bacteria to basically solid food bacteria, and that's the changing the microbes. And then, from adolescence until about age 65 or so, your microbes are constant, and then at age 65, they fall off a cliff, and they have big problems there. And I think what we know, I've just finished a book on healthy aging and microbes and things, and I think that the key concept in terms of aging, which also relates to dementia and things that we'll get there, is that basically as you get older, your microbes get, we call it dysbiotic, they get screwed up. And that then triggers more inflammatory, these microbes. They then trigger inflammation, and we call this inflammaging. As you age, you inflame more. And although inflammation is good for fighting infections, it's bad in constant low-grade inflammation. And so these microbes are triggering this inflammation, that's then causing tissue damage, and that then leads to pretty much every disease you see in aging. So the concept is if you could increase your beneficial microbes, decrease the inflammaging and the inflammation stuff, you should, in theory, be able to age much more healthy. And so, and we've known the microbes are involved in cognitive development, for example, for a long time, since the 1950s when they made germ-free animals. So you birth an animal sterilely by C-section, you keep it in a sterile cage with sterile food and water, it doesn't have any microbes in and on it. These things, they live if you give them a few key nutrients, vitamins, but they're screwed up. And their gut does not develop normally, it's much more permeable, the immune system is completely screwed, and we know the brains are really screwed. So if you take germ-free mice or rats, for example, they develop very abnormally, their social behaviors are very different, and we know that you need these microbes to have a normal kind of brain development. So the question is, what are they doing? And that question, I think, is still really unanswered. We don't know. We know they're needed for development. We've evolved in the sea of microbes. We know that when you're born, you get microbes, so our body has adapted to this. For example, that much of the food you eat, you can't digest. You rely on your microbes to do that for you, kind of thing. So brain development too. So they play a role in initial brain development. They also, in just terms of behavior, like if you take an anxious, a stressed, or a depressed mouse or rat, do a fecal transfer with their feces into a normal mouse or rat, you will transfer anxiety, stress, and depression.
Wow.
There's a big study out in the UK where they looked at everyone using antibiotics, and there was a direct correlation with increased antibiotic use with stress and depression and anxiety. So we know they're involved in those kinds of things too. And then as you get into the aging diseases, mainly Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, dementia kind of thing, we know that people with those diseases have very different microbes than normal. Like work in our lab and others, we can tell you with 80% accuracy just looking at your feces whether you have Parkinson's or not, for example.
Really? Wow.
And a characteristic, especially in Parkinson's, is an increase in these inflammatory microbes, a decrease in the beneficial anti-inflammatory ones. And the way anti-inflammatory works is they produce these things, short-chain fatty acids are called like butyrate. This is an anti-inflammatory. So if the butyrate producers are missing, you have more inflammation, you have more tissue damage, and then things cause disease. So, when you talk to people like, say, with Parkinson's, that's like the Michael J. Fox disease, for example, that's tremor, and, basically, and everyone says it's a brain disease, right? Well, it turns out some of the biggest risks for Parkinson's are constipation 30 years before you get it. The second biggest risk is eating red meat. These are gut things, right? So the question is, what does gut have to do with Parkinson's? And so this all came to the forefront when there's some studies in the Nordic countries where they were cutting the vagus nerve, which hooks the gut to the brain, right? And they were cutting it because these people had ulcers, peptic dysbiotic ulcers, and these ulcers were as a way of basically decreasing the pain of the ulcers. You cut the nerve. And to this day, I don't know why they went back and did that, but someone went back and looked at what the incidence of Parkinson's was when you cut the vagus nerve. And if you cut the vagus nerve, they have much less rates of Parkinson's. If you partially cut it, it's the same as not cut. You get Parkinson's kind of thing. So that's when people started thinking, well, maybe there's gut connection and this diet kind of connection. And so the way we think Parkinson's now works is that, as you have these dysbiotic microbes, you have inflammation in the gut, there's a molecule called alpha-synuclein, and the inflammation triggers the misfolding of alpha-synuclein in the gut. It's expressed in the gut, and this misfolded protein then works its way up the vagus nerve into the brain, and in the part of the brain called the substantia nigra, this alpha-synuclein misfolding triggers cell death. That kills the cells that produce dopamine, and dopamine is the suppressor that suppresses the tremoring and everything. So hallmark of Parkinson's is you don't have dopamine production, and you then get these tremors and things, and you take L-dopa to basically a drug to try and decrease that kind of thing. But we really strongly believe it all starts in the gut. So several years ago we started studying this, and we were some of the first in the world to show that people with Parkinson's really do have changed microbes kind of thing. And during COVID, we had an interesting experiment where a grad student in my lab, we were shut down due to COVID, right? So can I do anything? So he's really good at bioinformatics. So he basically did a bioinformatic analysis of people with and without Parkinson's following the MIND diet. So the MIND diet is basically the Mediterranean diet plus something called a DASH diet, which is a cardiovascular diet. And basically, it's eat healthy. It's decrease red meat, decrease white flour, more nuts, fruits, legumes, kind of thing. All the healthy stuff you should be eating. And what Avril showed is that basically, if people that followed that diet in women, you delayed the onset of Parkinson's by over 17 years. Now, that's stunning because Parkinson's doesn't start until 65, usually plus type thing. So you're going to die of something else first. Men, it was about a decade. And and of course, we showed the microbes are different and things. And so, we think that there's a major role there. Alzheimer's dementia, the data is not... Oh yeah, one other experiment in Parkinson's that really said microbes involved. If you take feces from people with Parkinson's or their partners don't have Parkinson's and put those into mouse model of Parkinson's, the Parky feces triggers Parkinson's. Normal people don't. So that was a cell paper a while ago saying. So that there's a lot of indications that they're involved in Parkinson's. Alzheimer's, it's a little less clear, but I think this goes back to the whole inflammation thing again. And a hallmark of getting Alzheimer's is basically this chronic inflammation. We know, for example, that there's a study of the brushing your teeth drops your Alzheimer's dementia rate by like 25% or something, because good oral health keeps your gums normal, and then all these nasty inflammatory microbes can't go through your mouth, through the gums into your body and trigger inflammation. And similar to Parkinson's, the MIND diet was actually developed for Alzheimer's. And if you follow that diet, you drop your rate of Alzheimer's rate by about 50%, which is stunning. And I mean, you can do this. It's just basically following the Mediterranean diet. It's just eating healthy kind of thing. And then, so there's that kind of data. And so there's all these swirling things around of this massive gut-brain connection. So how does a microbe in the gut talk to the brain? And so there's many ways to do it. Microbes do make various neurotransmitters and precursors like tryptophan and things so they make that, so you can directly make neurotransmitters. Some will go in the system, affect the brain. Affecting the immune system has a big effect on how the brain works, and you can do it that way. And then, or triggering effects that go up via the vagus nerve, which is basically, because we always thought the vagus nerve, well, that's what controls gut mobility and motility and things like this. Well, it turns out it's a two-way nerve, and you can send stuff the other way into the brain type thing. So there are no microbes that we know of really in your brain itself. Brain's sterile, but they're making molecules and then trigger events in the brain that then tend to do these brain events. So that's a long-winded way of saying that there's a lot going on there. The microbes, we know they're involved, but we don't really yet know how they're involved. And there's lots of indications they're doing something, but we have not yet unraveled how they're doing what they're doing, kind of thing. So.
Wow, absolute wealth of knowledge.
Data dump, I know. I let it rip.
But there's a lot to work off there, and I think there's a lot of actionable things for everyone listening to this as well. Mm-hmm. I think I would like to dive a little bit more into, so you say that kind of your microbiome develops and it's more malleable as you're younger, and then it will kind of develop into adulthood, remain relatively stable until you get older. But are there ways as an adult, and especially as a kid, I mean, my brother and sister-in-law just had little baby twins, and so I'm sure they'll love to hear about this as well. So
there's a book called Let the Beat Dirt I wrote. You need to give them a copy of that book. It's How to Raise Your Kids with Microbes. They have
Fantastic.
a profound effect on basically how the kid develops. And you can do, there's a lot of things you can do regarding setting them up with a healthy microbiome.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, you're referring to what we call the bookends of life, and that's where the microbes have the most effects.
Right.
And like as you said, they're pretty constant in the middle of life. But early in life, that's where you're getting colonized stuff. They play a profound effect on how the immune system develops, how the brain develops, how the gut develops. And for example, if you're born by C-section, you have a 25% higher chance of becoming asthmatic because you don't get the maternal microbes at birth. Breastfeeding drops asthma by 25%. Antibiotics in the first year of life increases asthma by 25%.
Wow. And
work in our lab has shown basically that we've identified like 6 microbes we know you got to have, and if you got those things, you won't get asthma. If you don't have them, you're going to get asthma. And
really?
We can predict whose kids are going to get asthma. So now we're trying to put these things back into kids, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not really the brain, but it's another example of these microbes. Our body's developmental cues are cueing off these microbes.
Totally.
And I'm sure that's the same in terms of brain development and cognitive development. Data is not really there yet. As I've said, germ-free animals and also animals you treat with many antibiotics, their brains just don't develop normally.
Yeah.
So, I think from brain development, you need a healthy microbiome.
And in terms of once you're an adult and you kind of have this established microbiome, what are some ways that we can adapt that microbiome to have more positive outcomes instead of these negative outcomes?
Well, about 5 years ago, I wrote a book with my daughter called The Whole Body Microbiome. She's a gerontologist. And it's basically... And originally I thought I'd write a book on aging, 65 plus, how microbes affect us. And she says, well, no, Dad. I mean, my friends, their granddads are getting Alzheimer's now. How can I not get Alzheimer's? And so we've just spent the last year rewriting. It's going to be called the Microbiome Master Key, unlocking your microbes for health and vitality. It's coming out. There's numerous chapters on the brain in there. And the book is basically designed of helpful hints of what you can do based on the science and true studies to say that if you do this, you will influence your microbes, which then will have a beneficial health effect on whatever disease you're thinking about. And the recurrent theme throughout this is again that you want to encourage your healthy microbiomes. And in the book, we go through every body part, like the brain, the gut, the urogenital tract, whatever, and what the effect of the microbes are in these things. And the common theme, basically, if you want to do anything, is you should eat healthy.
Yeah.
That's number one, and that's Mediterranean, mind diets type things. Number two, exercise. Now, you don't have to be a marathon runner, but getting the heart rate up and stuff has a profound effect on influencing beneficial microbes, kind of thing. And that recurrent themes comes again and again, be it type 2 diabetes, obesity, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's. This theme comes up again and again and again. It almost gets boring after a while. You can only say so many different ways, kind of thing. But that's the absolute key. Like I inserted a chapter on COVID and long COVID. We can predict who's going to get long COVID or not based on your microbiomes.
Really?
And healthy microbiomes decrease the long COVID chances. That data is really there. And we've for a long time saying that microbes could influence your immune system, but there wasn't really any data to show that like a healthy diet would improve your immune system. Wow, there's a Cell paper 2 years ago that just nails it to the wall that yes, that is improving your immune system. So the diets we follow, the basically the crap we love to eat, basically that because it's already broken down, you don't have normal healthy microbes, you have these inflammatory microbes, and they trigger all this inflammation, which leads to metabolic disease, which is your obesity, which is your type 2 diabetes, for example, and then all these dementia type diseases. So there's certainly things you can do. Right now, we don't have the magic pill probiotics. I think probiotics, for a bunch of reasons, that they're not there yet. But probiotics 2.0 is coming, where there'll be mixtures of microbes from the gut, for a defined biochemical reaction to decrease inflammation for inflammatory bowel disease, and it'll be prescribed as a medicine, which is actually mixed with microbes. That's coming. That's coming in the next few years. There's already in phase 2 and phase 3 studies now. So it will come. But for now, the best ways of improving your microbes is lifestyle. And they say that generally speaking, healthy aging and living, you can add about another decade of good health to your life by doing this. So there's certainly potential that things you could do. And for brain health especially, and all the data, there's a whole chapter on brain there. Basically, it's again, be healthy, eat right, exercise, use your brain, decrease inflammation, get a good night's sleep, have friends, be stimulated. That'll add about at least a decade of health to your brain.
Wow. Well, I think that's one thing that's been really popular lately is the health span, thinking about living healthfully into your elder years versus just thinking about lifespan. Exactly. And I really appreciate you taking the time with all this knowledge you have to write these books that can actually help people to understand this in a digestible way and to start thinking about these things in their daily life, because clearly it has some really tremendous impacts.
I say, the Microbiome Master Key, it's coming out next spring. It's fun because we go through all the science, but also there's all the helpful hints. Brush your teeth actually decreases these things. Just things you can do. And there's lots of things you can do that you tend not. Unfortunately, the medical profession is built on basically fixing diseases or trying to fix diseases, and this is more about preventing disease in the first place.
Yeah.
And that's not really human nature, but it's a lot easier to prevent a disease than it is to try and fix dementia when it happens. Kind of thing. So the data is overwhelming. I know there are things that you can do. Unfortunately, there's a lot of false news out there, if you want to call it that. There's false science out there, people claiming this probiotic cures everything, including baldness and things. But this book is just filtered through the science, and we spent all the time reading all the papers and everything, and what is a clinical double-blind placebo-controlled trial that shows that doing this actually does that.
Yeah. And
there's stuff out there that's doing that really nicely now.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I think people are starting to learn more about this. I mean, even this summer, I was working in a medical clinic, and the doctor that I was shadowing, he had a good idea of what was going on here, and he was prescribing patients who would be dealing with a wide range of symptoms. He'd say, well, you got to try getting more fiber. You need this fiber in your diet, so then your microbiome can digest. Key. And so I wanted to talk to you, I think, if you could explain a bit more about how that works, getting the fiber into your body. And the one area I didn't actually know as much about until you just mentioned is also the red meat as well. I was wondering if you could explain those two aspects of diet.
Yeah, so fiber is number one, absolutely. I mean, our ancestors had copious quantities of fiber. We don't eat very much fiber anymore. Fiber is basically microbial food. Yeah. So there's these complex sugars and carbohydrates that we basically don't break down. So eating lots of fiber, bran flakes or whatever, we don't digest it, so it goes all the way down to lower bowel, small and large intestine, and there the microbes break it down. Now fiber breaks down, one of the things it breaks down to is called short-chain fatty acids, and a key one is what we call butyrate, so it's a 4-carbon short-chain fatty acid, and butyrate it's the magic juice. It's basically anti-inflammatory, it feeds our mucosal epithelial lining, and it's what you want to have butyrate producers. Now, if you're eating white sugar and white flour, it's already broken down. It's absorbed already in the small bowel, doesn't even make it to the intestine, so you're starving your large bowel things. And it triggers the growth of these inflammatory type microbes, which are not so good. So basically what fiber does is feeds the good microbes so they can produce the anti-inflammatories to decrease the inflammation. That is basically how fiber works. And it's great. Red meat is... The reasons it triggers more of the inflammatory microbes for some reason. You don't need butyrate producers to digest red meat. To give you a good example, cardiovascular disease, which is heart attacks and strokes, right? Everyone says that's cholesterol. Well, it turns out that there's a molecule called trimethylamine oxide that is actually a better indicator of heart disease than cholesterol. And the way you make this molecule called TMAO is you eat red meat. There's a molecule called phosphocholine in red meat. It breaks down the microbes, break it down to something called trimethylamine, and trimethylamine gets oxidized in the liver to trimethylamine oxide. That, if you don't have microbes, you can't break it down. So in mice, for example, that lack the microbes to break it down, they never get cardiovascular disease, period. No heart attack, strokes. They don't get it. Vegans and vegetarians, they have way lower levels of cardiovascular disease because they don't have the microbes break down the red meat. Wow. Yeah. So... it's so if you're looking at your risk for heart attacks and strokes, it's not cholesterol levels, it's TMAO levels, which is again driven by these microbes. So there's thought that and they've done it in mice but not humans. If you block the microbial enzymes that break down to make TMA, block the first step in the pathway, it works in mice. You can feed them all the red meat you want, they actually don't get atherosclerosis, heart attacks and strokes because you block the enzymes that trigger this whole thing. So in theory, down the line, we could think about taking pills that inhibit these enzymes so we don't have as much TMAO and you can actually still eat some red meat kind of thing. Red meat just seems to be indicative of bad microbes, basically. It triggers these things and triggers all these other things. Wow.
Yeah. Well, that's very interesting. because you hear so much conflicting information. You hear you should do the keto diet, which means lots of meat.
Read the book.
Yeah, I think it sounds like for most people, with the resources we have right now, exercise to lower that inflammation, get the good microbiome. Definitely diet, getting lots of fiber, staying away from red meat. And one thing I wanted to ask you, it's a huge area of research. It seems like it's implicated in so many different diseases, is sleep. And is there any links of how sleep would affect the microbiome?
There is. 5 years ago, we wrote the first book. There was nothing. There's a lot since then. So we put a whole chapter on sleep. And microbes influence sleep, and sleep influences microbes, and it's as you'd predict. We don't know all the mechanisms yet, but yes, good sleep is heavily related, especially brain health, right? We now realize good night's sleep is so important for dementia and things like this, preventing dementia. And microbes are at the center of it. There's some really nice data that's come out recently, so we added that whole chapter on sleep. So the 5 things, to reiterate, are basically good diet, exercise, decreased stress. That's probably the worst one in our society that we have trouble controlling, because we live in a stressful society. You got to figure out how to chill out, kind of thing, a little bit. Decrease stress. Have a community, friends, family type thing. And my idea is you're swapping microbes with this group of, like, if you have an obese friend, you have a 50% higher chance of becoming obese.
Wow.
And if you take mice from obese animals into thin animals, become obese. So maybe part of that is microbial transfer. We don't know, but that's the theory.
Interesting.
And the last one, of course, is sleep. So those are the 5 reasons. You follow those things, you'll add at least a decade of healthy living, and you will live long and prosper, kind of thing, with your microbes.
Fantastic. Well, to everyone listening to this, you heard it from the man himself. The 5 things you got to focus on. And I know you have a lab meeting coming up here, so I want to be respectful of your time. But thank you so much.
Okay, pleasure.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay.